Welcome back to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Phillips from Holtom City PD in Texas. He has 29 years experience in law enforcement. Welcome to the show, Chief Phillips. Thank you so
Well,
much for
thanks for the
being.
opportunity, Paige. It's honor to be here.
Of course, I'm looking forward to it. Tell us a little bit about you and your career so far.
Well, I like to people that know me. I like to talk a lot. So we can start back. I was fortunate enough to grow up in Haltom City. My parents, when we were growing up, my dad was a narcotics abuser, physically, emotionally, verbally abusive to us and my mother. Finally, after a short time, my parents got divorced. We moved in with my grandparents in Hearst, which is a city just a few cities over. And through that, my mom worked her butt off to get us, everything that we needed to make sure we were on the right path, and then go down a path that would have been a lot easier to go down. And she got me involved in the law enforcement explorer program when I was 14. So I was with U.S. Customs out at DFW Airport, Grapevine PD, Colleyville PD, and Hearst Fire Department. So we, stayed busy and kept us out of trouble. And through that, I've always wanted to be in law enforcement for some reason. And, that just furthered my thirst for this career path. Graduated high school at 18, and 2 months later, I got hired on in the city of Euless as a PSO, public service officer slash jailer. Worked there for 3 years, and then in 1999, 21 years old, I got hired here at Haltom City. Been here ever since. I've worked patrol, traffic, motors, worked in professional standards, CID, um, did PIO work, SWAT, promoted to corporal, 2008, sergeant 2009, promoted to captain, oversaw operations, K9, and our lovely CAD integration back in 2015. Was when I was promoted to captain, and then the chief at the time actually went and become our city manager. And during his transition, one of the things was to find a new chief. And in 2016, I was appointed chief of police at Haltom City. And I've been blessed throughout my whole career is that I've had people that saw more in me than I saw in myself. So, I really thank them all the way back through all the explorers and, Euless. I still have a lot of friends and connections there. And of course, Haltom City, that all these people, the people I work with is what's made me successful.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about your childhood because when you and I talked offline and you had shared that with me, I relate to that a lot. My parents were both drug addicts. They were both addicted to meth. My dad was incarcerated for the sale of narcotics. So he served a 6 year sentence. And so I grew up with an incarcerated parent. And then he too, when he got out, was really abusive, verbally, physically. And so I experienced domestic violence in my life too. And I really find it fascinating, to kind of take a look at different people's trajectory and their childhood. And you said something that stuck out was that you could have gone down a path that was easier and you chose a path of resilience and chose something that was healthy and positive. And in my life, I actually started walking down that path of least resistance. I felt like I didn't have a lot of positive role models, even though I was raised by a single stepdad who did everything he could to provide me with, a good life. I didn't have a bar that was set really high for myself. And I was like, well, I guess this is the path I was meant to walk. I guess I'll just end up like my parents, and that's just how it is. And then was faced with that crossroads moment at one point where I said, no, I'm going to choose a different path for myself. How do you train or how do you develop the skills for resiliency, and how do you choose healthier choices for yourself when you're in times of adversity?
So going to my childhood, I was surrounded. My mother was very. She ended up remarrying to my stepfather. That had a big impact on my life too. But they were very purposeful. on ensuring that we had all the things that we needed to have to make the right choices. Um, the Explorer program, those officers, that relationships that we had with those individuals, growing up were very instrumental in making sure that the people that were involved in that program stayed on the right track. We didn't, they held us accountable. They gave us clear expectations, and we were able to progress through our careers like that. Um, it didn't only help us professionally, it helped us personally as well, because we knew there was somebody out there that actually cared.
Yeah.
And we didn't want to disappoint them by making wrong decisions or going down the wrong path. And it worked, because a majority of those people that I was in the Explorer programs with, and even my brother, are all in law enforcement or the fire field currently, to still today.
I think that speaks to the power of mentorship. And I've had this conversation a few times where I wish that I had someone who showed me a different way. I wish that I had someone who believed in me and told me that I could be something different or better. And so, now as I'm older, I recognize the importance and the power of having positive mentorship, not only in your personal life, but also your professional life.
And it goes to show some of those people that I still have, those explorers, advisors, officers that I still run into today, that they're a little bit older than they were. So if they watch that, that's my little jab at them. But you never understand the impact that you have on somebody, and how something so small can affect somebody. For example, some of the officers that we used to sit in the lobby and wait for an officer to come and ride. And I know as an officer, it was every time you walked out and there was an explorer or rider, you're like, oh my God, I wish this would pick somebody else, type thing. But those officers, they actually just chose to do that, and they taught us a lot. But it was those little things that they had no idea the impact that it was going to have on us going through our lives, both professionally and personally. And I owe a lot of thanks to all those individuals that had that impact on us.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. And I think, everyone who's listening today, we all have the ability to do that. We all have the ability to show up for other people and to positively impact their lives, even if we don't know it. And I don't think anyone goes around saying, I'm going to do this today because it's going to, in 20 years, pay dividends and someone's going to come back and say, I changed their life. But how can we every day operate in a way that's positive and helpful and kind? And how can we look out for other people around us, whether that's in our personal lives or professional lives? And sometimes it's easier said than done, right? We're
Oh,
busy, we're in the trenches, we're in the grind, we're kind of one track minds sometimes. But I think it's a really positive reminder that you do have the ability to do that. And sometimes we have to zoom out a little bit and we got to look around and see who's around us and how we can, show up with those qualities.
correct, because you never know what the other person's day is. You don't know what's going on in their life, and a smile, how you doing, how's the kids, how's the wife or husband or whatever, how much that can impact somebody, and just open a door to a conversation that could help them, express something that they need to get out.
100%. How do you think that your past experiences have helped you in this career? Do you feel like you were able to develop any like some sort of skill, like empathy, resiliency, like something that translated into this career?
I think empathy would be a good example, or a good definition of it. Is I'm empathetic towards people that are in similar situations, but then I'm kind of not empathetic when people try to use it as a crutch.
Mm,
That, hey, my dad was abusive, so I had to do this. And I don't believe that. I think a lot of it has to do with choices. And I'm not saying you have to make positive choices every minute of every second of your life, but how you react to those choices define your life choice. So if you make a bad decision, how you recover from that, it really defines who you are. And so those type of people that continue to choose and use it as a crutch, I don't have as much empathy for. But the ones that are going through it and trying to do the right thing and trying to go down the right path, it's given me a lot a willingness to help them a lot more.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. And, I almost, as you're talking, feel like for those who have gone through hard times and who have created a better life for themselves and who have chosen better options or better choices for themselves, it's almost our responsibility to talk about it. I
Yes.
think that sometimes, to your point, if someone doesn't know that they have another option, then they're going to choose the path of least resistance. They're going to choose what's put in front of them. And I think about this a lot. And I agree with you. I think we all have the choice. We have to take accountability for ourselves. I also have empathy for people who are in situations where all they see is that, their parents are this way, their friends are this way, their community that they're in is the same way. And so they think that that's the only option. And when you have other people who have come out the other side saying, hey, that is an option, and you have that choice, you can do that. But you also have this other choice. And I made this choice, and look where I am now, and look what you could be. I think there has to be kind of a guiding light for people to understand that there are two ways to go, left or right, and which one are you going to choose for yourself? But if you don't see the other path, maybe if it's completely covered, by the forest and you can't see that path and you don't know that you can walk down it.
It kind of goes back to what we were just talking about, is that you got to be able to talk about your story, be that light, but two is just have those conversations, because you never know what the other person is going through, whether it's, like you said, personally, professionally. You could be going to a call and just on a domestic and dealing with a kid on the side, and your 30-second 2-minute interaction with that kid could change the trajectory of their life. And it's all about what you say. Tell your story out there too. I mean, there's nothing to hide. It's not a sign of weakness. It's just, your story may help somebody else, so be willing to share those stories.
Yeah. I saw something, and I don't know how much science this is backing, so, don't completely quote me, but it was in the context of mental health and suicide, and they said that it takes 13 minutes to change the trajectory of someone else's life. So a 13-minute conversation. And I was talking to someone else, and they said that a normal traffic stop is roughly that long, about 10 minutes, 10 to 13 minutes, just depending. And so the idea is that, you do have that ability within your day to be able to change someone's life if you choose to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we teach that in our in service in our FTO program right there. Is traffic stops are a prime example. If you come up on a violator, or an operator of a vehicle on a during a traffic stop, and they're very not police friendly, but don't take that personal, because you don't know the interaction they had with the officer prior to that. So your interaction at that point can change, even if it might be a little bit, change that person's thought process on law enforcement and interactions with law enforcement. So, you know, the old adage, kill them with kindness, is, we try to push that along.
Yeah. I remember I remember this was a while ago. I was rushing to get somewhere and I was pulled over. And the officer walked up and he goes, "Hey." And he goes, "Oh, I like your tattoos." And I was like, "Thank you." And he's like, "Yeah." And he like had a conversation with me. And I still remember that conversation to this day. Was I speeding? Yes. Did I deserve to be pulled over? Yes, I did. But for him to walk up and be like, "Hey, cool tattoos." I was like, wow, like, thank you. Like, it felt good to have someone come up and like be really nice and cool about it. And it makes the situation a lot easier because, it doesn't ever feel fun to get a ticket and you're like, dang it, I shouldn't have been speeding. And like, that was my fault. And I'll take accountability for that. But to have a positive interaction where someone's just being cool, they're just being nice and they're like, hey, like, gotta do it, for obvious reasons, but I'm gonna be like really cool and kind to you along the way. And so that
Yeah, just
sticks
don't
out
be a
to me.
robot. Yeah, just
Yeah.
be you.
Yeah.
And most of the departments are hiring people because we can teach you to be a cop. We can't teach you to have a good heart. So, most of these people, most of these organizations are looking, are you a good person? And if you are, just be that person throughout your career and you're going to be okay.
Yeah, 100%. You had told me that earlier in your career that you wish that you would have listened to the old timers a little bit more. What are some of those things that they told you that maybe you wish you would have listened to when you were a younger officer?
Man, there's a lot. So, one was the financial side of things is just, get your finances in line. Um, don't do the new cop starter pack, a new truck, a new house, knock up your girlfriend, get married, hopefully do it in the reverse order. But, some of us learn the hard way. Um, just make sure that you don't the old timers around here, I hate to say, the experienced people around here when I got hired were saying don't get involved in the day-to-day politics in the department. Don't get sucked into where this is 100% your life. Have friends outside of law enforcement. Do things. Don't spend your days working off duty. Spend time with your family. And it took me a long time. It took me till 2017 to really learn that stuff. So I was knee deep into it before I realized that. And then now we're trying to push that to our new people here now is that just that, sometimes we have to protect them from themselves.
Yeah.
And so those old timers is I wish I'd have done it a long time ago. And one of the bigger things is, they've always said get a book and just start writing things down, at
Mm.
the end of the shift, some cool things that happen, because, you're going to be sitting around telling stories. And some of the, we all get around campfire and deer camp or whatever and start talking. And, one of the guys will be like, hey, you remember when you did this? I'm like, no. And he goes, oh, yeah. And it'd be good to be able to rehash or call BS when they're telling a story that's not true about you. So,
I like that a lot. Um, and I will ask you a question, but one of the things that we talk about as far as wellness as well, and that journal. Writing down good things is a part of rewiring your brain to look for good things, right? So if you have something where you're like, man, this was really fun, this was really cool, I felt really proud, I felt like I did a good job, and you write those things down, you're training your brain to look for more of those successes, more of those positive experiences that you had. And then the reverse to that, too, is you can also write down some of the stuff that you are going through, if it's stressful, if it's hard, and you can write that down and it's called a brain dump. And so you're putting everything on the page and you can kind of close that book so that it doesn't linger within you forever. You don't just shove it down and keep going. You're able to have an outlet where you can get it out. So I really like that idea of having a journal and one, having the really cool stuff that you want to look back on, the stuff that you're proud of, the stuff that's going to keep you going, in the hard times, looking back on that. And then on the flip to that, if you need to get anything out, it's a good way to kind of get it on the page and out of your brain.
yeah, so some of the conversations I have when I hire new people is that exact. So I tell them, it's natural. There's not an officer that I know that hasn't between years 3 and 8, they go through that, little burnout phase where this department sucks, the city sucks, the administration sucks, everybody hates me, I'm going to go somewhere else. And, I tell them if you can push through that little speed bump and then get over that, it's a lot better. And I recommend to them, I was like, just go home, take a piece of paper out and put why you want to work wherever you want to work. For me, why you want to work at Haltom City, why you applied here, and be honest with yourself. And nobody's going to read that but you. And
Mhm.
then why you wanted to be a police officer, and write those two things down. And then when you get a locker, hang it in the back of your locker. And when you get to that burnout phase at, 4 or 5 years, you open your locker and you're looking at that and you can say, hey, look, 5 years ago, this is where I wanted to be. And this is what, am I still meeting this? And then you utilize that to help, go over that speed bump and sorry, get through that.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. I think it's important to remind yourself of why you did something in the first place because you do lose that. And things do get hard. And I have to do that for myself too, and I think a lot of people have to do this in their personal lives as well,
Oh, 100%.
why did I get into this relationship? You have to remind yourself of the things that you love about what you do and, the people that you're around. And again, it goes back to, I think, mental training. I think the more we can practice. I know it sounds woo-woo and some people still think it's, kind of like out there, but gratitude. It's all about like how can we have a positive mindset because there's so much negativity, there's so much stress. And it goes back to what you said before of we have the choice on how we want to respond to a situation. You can choose to be negative. You can choose to be down all the time, or you can make the choice to see things in a positive light. You can make the choice to be grateful for the things that you have, even when things are really, really bad. You can still make that choice. And I think sometimes we forget that. We kind of point our fingers out externally instead of understanding that, yes, sometimes things really suck. Sometimes it's really hard to see the good things, but there are good things, and we have that choice.
I had somebody, actually it was my current city manager, one that told us it was funny, is my current city manager used to be a police officer in one of the cities I was an explorer at. And so we were sitting down because he was appointed as assistant city manager, and he looks and he goes, "Man, I know him from somewhere." And it was the ears that drew it off. So he's like, so it was funny. But he told me, it's like, people focus. So you have 10 things going on in your life. 8 of them are good, and 2 of them are bad. If you focus on those 2 that are bad, they're going to consume and overshadow those other 8 things. So, be purposeful. And that's one of my biggest things is just be purposeful and your mental health, your physical health, your financial health, and then concentrate, be purposeful on really finding the positive things that are going on. Because you can always find positive in something. You might have to work at it, but you can find something positive about everything.
Yeah, I tell people a lot, it's how can we create small habits over time? Like small actionable things over time are going to create big impact. And so, one of the things that I say, because I think we talk about this stuff a lot, and it's okay, well, how do I do it? I'm so busy, I got 100 million things going on. How do I do these things? And so, in the context of like training our brain to look for the positive things and to identify the fact that we have a lot of good stuff and maybe only a few small things that are bad. I always encourage people to habit stack. I think this is the best way. We have to create consistency, but we're not asking you to take up more time. We're asking you to integrate these things in the time that you already have. So, for example, most people are going to drive to work, right? It
Mm,
usually, even if you don't have a long commute, even if it's a 3-minute commute, maybe every time you drive to work, you just say 3 things that you're grateful for, 3 things that are good. Maybe you do it when you're in the shower. Everyone's got a shower at some point. So make it a habit that every time you're in the shower, you identify 3 things that are good. Maybe it's when you're brushing your teeth. We can copy and paste this to a lot of different things,
yes.
but maybe you can choose one thing that you do consistently on a daily basis. And then we can incorporate this to start to train our mind to look for more of the positive things. And so I have found that to be really successful in my life. I don't know if it's because of my childhood experiences, but I'm always looking for the shoe to drop. I'm always thinking that things are going to go wrong. I'm always looking for like the quote unquote like danger or, bad things to happen because typically when things were going really good in my life, they weren't good for very long. And so I was always scanning and just waiting for the bad stuff. And so I have to do that within myself. I have to remind myself that there are so many things that are good. And so habit stacking has been really helpful for me to create that consistency over time, and it doesn't feel like another like ball we have to juggle or a plate we
Yeah.
have to spin. It's like, okay, every time I shower, I'm just going to identify 3 things that are good. Done.
Yeah. I didn't slip in the shower today. That's a good thing. So,
Yeah, I woke up,
yeah.
and I had a cup of coffee. We're good, so yeah, I like it. Why do you think that young people don't want to take advice from the old timers? Why is there that dynamic? Because when we look at people who have been in this career longer, when I see wisdom, I see experience, I see people who know what it's like to go through this career. So why do you think there's that dynamic where the young people are like, I don't need to take that advice?
So So coming back, thinking back to when I first got here, you had some of the old people, man, I wouldn't get in law enforcement right now. This, it's BS, nobody supports us, all the same things. And it's cyclical. We're seeing that now. And, as a young officer, those old people are sitting around being negative and always, you know, I don't know who listens to this, but bitching about everything that's going on. It's the new people are coming in and they have a passion, a thirst for, I mean, this is everything that they wanted, they worked for. So they're like, man, how are you so negative? And they kind of tune people out when they're negative. And so, I think the old timers have a real big impact on the new people on when they come in. What are you doing? What are you saying to these individuals when they come in here? Are you saying only negative things about law enforcement, about I can't wait to get out of here. I'm ready for retirement. You got a countdown clock on your computer screen. That just says, it pushes off a persona to them that this one, it turns them off to you, but potentially turns them off to the department too. So it goes back to what you're saying, is that you don't know what kind of day these people are having. So, be positive towards them. you
Mm.
know, Haltom City has been up and down. I mean, we went through some very tough times early on in my career because of some bad choices of administrators and bad choices of people that worked here. And, it was tough and it had been easy to bounce, but, Haltom City has been good to me. It's been good to a lot of people here. So you just got to remain focused and concentrate on the positive things. Don't dwell on the negatives. And I think the old timers need to be reminded of that too.
Yeah, no, and I think it goes back to what we talked about before. Like, you never know how you can influence someone and set the trajectory for their life or their career. And I think that it's really rewarding to be able to bring someone else up, to be able to teach someone the things that you know. And so maybe if someone is later on in their career, I think it's a really important reminder for everyone to be more positive, but for you to understand that you have the ability to mentor these new officers, men and women who are coming
Exactly.
into this career, and you can really help lift them up. You can help set the trajectory in their careers as well. And I think that that plays into your own wellness. It feels good to develop other people. It feels good to pass on your knowledge and experience to other people and to see them thrive. And so maybe that's a way that you can also find more gratitude and positivity in your life.
But on the flip side, the younger officers need to be receptive and be able to take on that stuff. Some of the struggles we have is the generational gaps between, the old timers and the new people. The newer generation just, they want to know why. It's not like they don't want to do it, but they just know, why do I have to do X, Y, and Z? And the old timers is, they're like, because I told you to. Well, that doesn't work. So it creates tension between those two groups. So just giving them, everybody's got to give a little bit. So the old timers just explain a little bit of the why, and then the new people understand, hey, they told me a little bit. Now let's run forward with it.
Yeah. I had someone recently say this, and I thought it was an interesting perspective. You can let me know how you feel about it. But they were saying if someone asks why, like, why is it a big deal for you to tell them the why?
It's not.
It was like, just tell them the why. Like, unless it's like in a serious
Correct.
situation where you're like, we don't have time to go over the why, like we gotta act. But if you're just like sitting around and briefing and you're saying something and they're like, why is there so much resistance to just explaining the why?
Correct.
Like, it's not a big deal. And so I think it's a message to anyone who does come from, because I came from that. Like, when I grew up, like, if I asked my parents why, ooh, they were like,
Yeah.
because I told you so, and it was the same thing. And I don't think anyone likes to hear because I told you so. I think everyone, regardless of what generation you're in, everyone wants to feel like when they ask a question or they're trying to learn something that, someone is going to respond in a way that's productive. But, if you are that person that's like, because I told you so, or they get offended by the why, I think the question is, why are you being offended by that? And why is it a big deal for you to just explain the why?
Yeah. And I think, one of the points you talked about, if it's an intense situation or, a critical incident that because I told you so is the only thing. I think the important part on the backside is a debrief on the backside to still explain your why. It might not be right when that's being told, but this is why I told you to do X, Y, and Z, and this is why I told you to do what I told you to right then because we didn't have time to discuss any of that stuff. I
Yeah.
think there's always a time to explain the why on the back end.
And I
And
think
I hope my
even
kids don't listen to this because I tell my kids because I told you so a lot. So
well, I think that context matters. And if someone's saying why because they genuinely want to learn and develop themselves versus like an attitude of
right.
like why, I think that and so if you are someone who wants to know the why, I think approaching it in that way of like, hey, like why? Like I'm really interested in learning. And then on the flip side, someone being able to identify, hey, this is an opportunity for development and growth in that person. And I have the skills, I have the knowledge to be able to explain it so that we can develop the other person. But I think you're 100% right. It's a partnership. And I think context matters, but I think sometimes it's, unfortunately, and I'm guilty of this too. Trust me, I'm super guilty of this too. Um, it's I think a lot of times we let our ego get in the way. We want people to just do what we say, and then when we feel challenged, it's like a hit to our ego, and so we're like, well, because I told you so, and just do what I said, instead of understanding, hey, this is an opportunity for me to help this person out. Yeah. Okay, so you said that you had some hardships within the organization, and I know that you said that there were kind of a series of events that happened. Can you walk us through a little bit about, what happened and maybe how you were able to get through those things as a department?
Yeah, so I was appointed chief in May of 16. May of 20, we had our first officer involved shooting that had occurred, or one previous was 2009. And we hadn't lost an officer since the early 90s in the line of duty. So May of 20 hit, of course, March of 20, COVID hit. So we were in the midst of that. May of 20, we get into our shooting. It was a couple of days post George Floyd. So the tensions were high with use of force and all that stuff. So we hit that, started working through um, the officer involved shooting part. October of 21, we lost an officer in the line of duty. During that year, we had higher than number or higher than usual homicides, most involving juvenile suspects and juvenile offenders. July 2nd of 22, so just a few months into our fiscal year, we had three officers ambushed and shot. July 25th, we had another officer involved shooting. 2 weeks after July 25th, we were involved in another officer involved shooting with a neighboring agency. And then October of 22, a year after, we lost another officer
Wow.
in a house fire at his. It was an off-duty house fire at his house. So it was, those 2 years, it was consistently like somebody was just walking around hitting us in the jaw every time we turned around. So it was very difficult to keep people motivated, keep people focused. And there was, we were talking about, the 10 things going on, too bad. It almost looked like there was 8 bad and 2 good. And it was really hard to find the good in any of this stuff.
Yeah.
So, trying to identify avenues to offer these individuals to seek help, and then one for them to be acceptive of the help
Yeah.
was very difficult.
What were some of those things that happened afterwards? How did you, and this is a twofold question, but because I think we forget about leadership, we forget that it's not just employee wellness, it's leadership wellness too. And I know that leaders put themselves last a lot of times, but how did you recover from that personally? And then how did you support the agency? What were some of those things that you tried to implement?
So to be honest, I still haven't dealt with it all.
Mm,
I so this is one of the podcasts, or this podcast is probably something that I should watch, go back and watch and listen to. I'm very good at giving people advice and doing it, but following the advice is another thing. There's another chief that works in a neighboring city. He was involved in a shooting back when we were both in motors, and I kept pushing him to go get help, and he finally, and that was back in the early 2000s. Um, and he finally recently went and got help. And I got the text on my phone still to this day from probably last year. I think it's when he sent it to me. He goes, water's fine. Go talk to somebody. It really helps. But it's my problem is I'm so focused on ensuring that my people are okay. Focused on my family to make sure that they're okay, that I really put myself last.
Yeah.
And I just recently returned back from the FBI National Academy, and one of the classes really at home is that if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not taking care of everybody else around you, and they can feel the tension, they can feel anything that you have going on. It really, if you have a relationship and a good culture with the people you work with and your family, that they can feel all that stuff, whether you think it's being presented to them or not, and you're trying to hide it, they still see through it. And so you have to be purposeful in making sure that you're getting the help for yourself, because if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not going to take care of them. So with that being said, I'm working through stuff now to go and get that help and talk to people that I need to.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that that was really relatable. I think that a lot of people who are listening to this, including myself, can relate to that. And it's almost counterintuitive, right? You want to put your focus on everybody else because you care. You want to make sure that everyone around you is good. But I agree with you. I think one, if you want to be the best version of yourself for other people, it's the oxygen mask, analogy. Like we have to take care of ourselves first. But I also think, leading through example, if you're doing it and you can be that person that says the water's fine, hop on in, I did it, you're going to be okay. Then it gives other people permission to also do those things because I think they're looking at you. They're looking to you for help.
And that's some of what we did, following all our critical incidents and the deaths that we experienced over that year. uh, I had a relationship with some of those individuals that were involved, and highly encouraged would be, I guess, a good way of putting them, that they needed to go get the help. Because one, I saw two benefits. One, definitely for them, but two, they were informal leaders and looked highly upon by their coworkers. And when they come back and that they're telling their coworkers, hey, yeah, this isn't as bad. It's not some monster that you go lay on a couch and some guy just sits across and writes another thing. That you're having a conversation with somebody, and it can be about anything. It doesn't have to be about the event that you think you're going there for. And they come back and they're able to share that experience with others around them. It kind of creates that, um, the fear of the unknown goes away, and more people actually went, and they were holding each other accountable to going and getting the help they needed.
Yeah. You know, we talked about this a little offline, and I'm really interested to kind of, hear your perspective on this is, organizationally, when you are putting in resources, how do you know what resources and how do you support your people specifically? One of the things you said to me was you need to find resources that fit the heartbeat of the organization. I thought that really stood out to me. And so, through my conversations, I understand that everyone's different. It's not a one size fits all. The culture is going to be different within each organization. And sometimes there's maybe a little bit of a checkbox, and kind of a bare minimum that's happening. And so, as chief of an organization, how do you find resources that fit the heartbeat of your organization? And what are some of the things that you think are maybe just a check the box or are settling?
So I know I said I wasn't going to say it, but EAP is shit. So I don't like it. That's one of the checkbox things. The psychologist after a critical incident, that's a checkbox thing. What you need to do is, if you're really in it for your people mental wellness, you got to find, like you said, somebody that fits your culture, your heartbeat. It's not a one size fits all. And you can't just have one. You got to have a stable of these resources in. Texas is very fortunate. They provide us a lot of resources, and then we have a lot of internal resources. Another thing that happened to the city is we had a public works employee that flipped a lawnmower and was crushed and killed. And his friend that worked, they hung out outside of work and worked together, was unable to get the lawnmower off, and he watched his friend pass away. So, I'll brag on Haltom City is that we realize that it's not just first responders. It's, there's other members of our organization citywide that have suffered or are suffering some stuff. So we found resources that were not just a one size fits all for PD and FD, but it's also for public works.
Mm.
And we offer those resources anonymously, so they just go to these resources, and all we get's a bill back saying, "Hey, an employee come and talk to us," and the city pays for it, no questions asked. We pay for marriage counseling and all this, and it is separate from that EAP. Some of the, there's individuals that have used EAP, and of course you get like 15 days or 10 days or whatever, your organization is set up. And it's not individuals that have experienced um, our experiences is not individuals that have experienced anything that we have. So it's hard for, officers or firefighters or somebody that has witnessed a critical incident go there and talk to somebody, and then they say, well, yeah, I understand how you feel. My grandma died, or my cat passed away the other day. Well, no, that's totally different.
Mm.
You got to find somebody that understands where you're coming from with this stuff. And we have found those resources and we use those. Another thing, we have a great relationship with our fire department. So our peer support team, you know, when FD goes to a critical incident, PD is going to be there. When PD goes to one, FD is going to be there. So we're seeing the same things. So what we've done is our debriefs or our critical, our SISMs, our peer review stuff, they're all done PD and FD together. So we do those and we get them together and do it. And then of course we do our own PD stuff and they do their own, but it gets the individuals that were involved in that incident at the exact same time in a room together talking. And that's really helped as well.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing. I think that the more we can have conversations about this, then the more people can start to kind of expand their thought process of what's possible. You don't have to settle for an EAP if that's not working. And I think there's such a small window of opportunity, and I've seen this even just in my space, which is, obviously different than the therapy side of things. I don't do that. But I've had other agencies that would be like, yeah, like we tried this and, the person wasn't culturally competent. They didn't know what was happening. And now everyone's turned off. Nobody trusts it and no one wants to do anything because the people who did, have the courage to take that step and go do it had a negative experience. And so now they're even more guarded than they were before. And so I think it's important to understand that there's a small window of opportunity to build trust and to build that receptiveness to things. And how can we be intentional with the providers that are out there?
Exactly. And like you said, you got to, or I said that you got to have a stable. So it might not be it's not a one size fits all,
Mm.
um, you know, there's a lot of organizations that, say, hey, we're supporting financial mental wellness, for our employees, and they put it on paper. But all that's good, but are you actually doing it?
Mm.
Are they actually utilizing it? That's the key. And you want it to become where it's not it doesn't feel forced that they do it automatically, like our peer support, meetings that they have between FD, that's automatic. There's no administration involved in that process. No, it's just the officers and the firefighters, organizing that and driving that. Critical incidents, we monitor those, and our peer support team is doing the recommendations, following up with people. And it's not only after critical incidents. I mean, it can be, okay, now I realize that, somebody got into a car wreck. Now they don't have any cars, or, their wife is sick. They just had a new baby. There's all kinds of things. And what we do here is we develop that from the day that we sign the conditional job offer until they leave. Um, we offer them the support. So, through the academy, we give them the options, we give them the connections for the peer support, the mentors. We give them access to the external resources, just as an officer does, because just because they didn't suffer a critical incident that I would define as a critical incident, a failure on a test or a low grade on a test may create a similar level of stress that they need to address, and then we give them the opportunities to do that.
Yeah. So I want to kind of just maybe recap what I understand as kind of, steps and let me know if I'm on the right track here. So, when it comes to wellness and supporting your people, making sure that it's not just a checkbox, finding people who are culturally competent and who can actually support, the ins and outs of the career and what you guys are going through. Start early and really put an effort to make these things normal and a part of the culture. And the people who have been through those resources and have had positive experiences talking about it, sharing that so that other people see that it's okay and that they can trust those resources. Am I kind of on the right
You
track?
explained it a lot better than I did.
Thank you. No, I think that's great. And I really appreciate kind of like the tactical, like this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it. My final question for you is for the younger generation, and we already talked about this before. So if you are younger and you are listening, listen up, listen to the words of wisdom for people who come before you. But for the people who are, younger in their career, what words of wisdom would you share with them? Maybe something that you wish you would have known earlier or something that's helped you along the way.
This profession is the best, and it's kind of like an old adage, is that it's you get the front row seat to the best show on earth. But it's, and I tell people when I hire, I was like, if your life is this work part is this, and during this part, if you decide to leave, I'm going to be filling your position, but if you do that and try to leave on the other part of your life, when it comes to your family, they can't replace you as easy as the organization can.
Mm.
So remain focused on your family, your friends. Find an organization that fits you culturally. Make sure they understand and they back you. Don't chase a dollar bill, because it doesn't matter how much you make. The more you make, the more you spend, unless you're purposeful in saving it. So find an organization that's going to be for you. Find an organization and administration that's going to back you, because there's a lot of organizations and administrations out there that are not willing. An administrator is not worth their salt unless they're willing to lose their job for you for doing the right thing at the right time. And they got to be willing to stand up and do that. So find an organization that fits you is the most important part. Don't chase the dollar. And then, continue to have friends outside of work. Continue to have friends that are not cops, to keep you grounded. And just don't get so sucked in that all you're doing is working overtime and off duty, because there's more to life than this job.
Thank you. Great
You're
words of
welcome.
wisdom. I appreciate your time so much. Thank you for coming on
Oh,
and spending an hour with me. I really do appreciate
all
your
right.
time.
Thank you, ma'am.
Of course.